Hey everyone, and welcome back to Clinical Crumbs. I just wanted to make a short video today about writing the perfect personal statement for CaRMS. I realize the CaRMS deadline is coming up very soon, in 8 days actually, for this year's cohort, and sorry, this is very short notice, but I think when you're all residents, you'll understand why. Anyways, hopefully some tips today will be helpful to you as you prepare your statements and just make sure they're uploaded in time. So first, remember to think a bit about the purpose of this personal statement and why it's included in the CaRMS application. My opinion is that essentially the personal statement is a chance for you to include things that might otherwise not be apparent from your CV or the other application materials that you also submit in your CaRMS application. And what I mean by that is it's not really a place to repeat things from your CV because there's already another place where reviewers could read that information. And it would be best to use this statement as a chance to talk about things that people might not otherwise know about you. Another thing is to think about the personal statement as a formal job application letter because your application for residency is really an application for this job. And it's important to think of the personal statement in that way and not really as a creative writing piece. So, of course, unless the prompt you're given asks you to do something creative. But otherwise, I would consider this a formal piece of writing and not something to be too, I guess, artistic with. So how should you structure your essay? This is really important because most essays only have a certain word count and you have to make all of it count. And really your personal statement has to address these three things. You have to explain why you're interested in the specialty. You have to explain why you personally are suitable for training in the specialty to which you're applying. And you should also make space to include why you wish to train at this particular program or site. Of course, this is generally for those statements where they're asking you for a personal statement and you have freedom in what you write about. But some programs may ask for a specific prompt, and if that's what they're asking for, you must answer the prompt. And if you can, if it's natural, try to include the above information if it's possible, just because that's really the opportunity for you to do that. But obviously, if the prompt is specific about you must answer this particular question, then don't deviate from that. So just some important tips. I have helped other students read their essays, and I found sometimes many students would do the similar mistakes or oversights where, in particular, it's very important that you make sure your essay addresses the entire prompt you're given. So sometimes they might ask you for, 2 parts to a question, and you have to make sure that your essay addresses both sections. Don't end up spending all of your essays, speaking to the first point and not to the second at all. I would also make sure you ask a resident or a staff to read through your essay and to give critical feedback about it. It's best if you can ask them to be as, harsh as possible about your work because, now's the time to hear it. And ideally try and find a resident or staff who's in the program you're trying to get into or the specialty you're trying to get into to read it, just so that they usually have had experience with this in the past and can hopefully give you some tips in general, like with writing in general. But I would always suggest you take a break from the essay for a few days after you've put in a lot of work, and then look at it again so that you get a bit of a fresh perspective. It's common for, if you work on it every day for a lot of hours, it's easy to kind of overlook, you know, how it looks to other people because you've been staring at it for so long. So if you just kind of take a break for even a day or two and then go back to it, usually you'll notice things that you didn't notice while you were initially working on it. Some very, I guess, common mistakes that I think students make when they're writing their CaRMS essay are these ones I've listed here, and this is really common. So I would just carefully read the essays that you have prepared and, you know, look for these problems and try your best to avoid them because you know, it's something that can be fixed in the time that you have. So a lot of essays tend to have poor structure, and by that I mean, you know, it's sometimes like a bit of a creative opening, you know, trying to grab the reader's attention, and then it kind of, you know, goes into how the specialty is really interesting, and then some, you know, experiences they've had within the specialty and how that's interesting, and you know, reader interest in the site, and then, you know, some anecdotes which may be extracurricular or related to the specialty, but it's just kind of a bit of a meandering essay. And the lack of structure can make it very hard for reviewers to know, you know, to really know like what they're getting out of this personal statement, like what are they learning about you. So it helps a lot to have a very structured approach. You know, look at the points I gave in the previous slides about what you need to include in your essay. Make sure that each paragraph you have addresses one of those points. You know, you can have the opening paragraph be, you know, why you want to work on the specialty, and what drew you to it, or a story that's clinical that or non-clinical that brought you to the specialty, and then have a paragraph about, you know, why you're suitable for training in this specialty, you know, what experiences and you know, skills or background you have that makes you the perfect candidate. And then, you know, why do you want to train at the site? That can be another paragraph. And, you know, what makes you want to apply there and train there, and why should that program committee be interested in you? So, you know, each paragraph should answer one of these questions, and it's better to keep it very structured. Another very common issue is students often use like very generic or generalized concepts to explain their interest in the specialty. So that would be like, you know, I'm really interested in surgery because I like to use my hands, and I've always been interested in surgery since I was really young, and you know, I think that all surgeons should be really honest and you know, learn quickly, and I feel that, you know, I have done that in the past, but that, you know, there's no examples or anything like that. So anyway, obviously that's not usually what, you know, people write that exactly, but a lot of the time the essay is actually a series of sentences which are very generic, and they just talk about interest in the specialty, but not really, there are no examples of, you know, anything the student has done in the past that might show their interest in the specialty or show their skills. So I would try to avoid that. I would use like fewer of these general statements if possible, because in the end everyone has quite similar things to say about those things, and it doesn't really stand out. Another common mistake is using sort of over-the-top language or informal language in the essay. And just remember, this is a formal job application letter, so this isn't really the time to be overly, I guess, informal. Also, sometimes using very strong language like, you know, fantastic, incredible, amazing, you know, just like in like very intense descriptions of clinical situations, especially when referring to patients, you know, and describing their emotional states. Sometimes it can be very over the top. Sometimes students will talk about like a clinical situation or a previous experience, and it will be sort of dramatized in some way, and sometimes, especially if it's over the top, it can be a little bit cringy, so we kind of want to avoid that. You don't want to make the reviewer cringe when they're reading your essay, so just try to make sure you look at that. Another common mistake can be that sometimes the reasons that the student gives for wanting to do this specialty or wanting to train in this location, they seem a bit weak or insincere. So, like say, a certain city is known for something, and then that's, the only reason why that student would be interested in training there, or their interest in the specialty doesn't seem to be well thought out. It just seems like they're applying because they're backing up or something like that. And then I guess the last thing would be, if there's some perceived lack of interest in the training site, like when they write the training site interest paragraph part of the essay, it doesn't seem like they have a very good reason for why they would even come and train there, or it sounds like they don't really want to train there, and this is obviously not their first choice. This can come across in the essay sometimes, and that's not really what you want, because this is a job application letter, so you don't want to give the impression that you don't really want this job. So I would just read through your letters and look through and make sure you're not making these fairly common mistakes. Most letters that I have reviewed have one of these at least in the first reading, so just make sure you carefully check yours. So let's say, you have a very nice letter and you're just wanting to make sure it stands out. So how do you do that? So I guess, I would think about your previous experiences and use unique experiences that you've had in your past to try and highlight your interest in the specialty or the site, or to show your breadth as a person. These things, especially depending on, how you describe your experiences, and if you're able to convey your maturity or, independence, or, your motivation, or things like that, which are good characteristics, these will help the letter stand out, because you're showing, your skills and strengths in, your previous experiences. Try to make sure that every sentence in your letter has some purpose in being there. So there's really not any space for filler sentences. You should really make sure each sentence has a reason why it's there, and that it's interesting to read. This always helps, because reviewers have to read so many letters, and you want it to be something that they're interested in reading in. They're going to read a bunch of essays which are all applications for the same job. And the more interesting yours is, the more likely it'll hold their attention. Another thing you can try and do is try to show, not tell. And what I mean by this is try to show your points, like what you're trying to get across, in stories, or like experiences that have happened, and they have to be real. So just make sure these stories you describe, they can kind of show your, for instance, your communication skills, your leadership, your attention to detail, your technical skills, things like that, rather than, you're sort of discussing how you have technical skills or how you have leadership skills, but, there's no example of that, or there's no story to back up your statement that you have these skills. So I think the best letters are a collection of well thought out, interesting experiences and stories that the candidate has like thoughtfully described, and they reflect the personality of the candidate well. And so you can kind of, from reading it, learn more about the person, and that will really stand out compared to most other letters that are being submitted. And kind of as mentioned previously, you want to make sure that the language that you use is assertive but not over the top. So you can use strong language, not in the not in the strong language sense, but I mean like you want to be using language that is that conveys your point, and you can use words that convey strongly your point, but you don't want to be over the top where it's a bit superfluous. So just a few last thoughts about the personal statement for CaRMS. So just remember that although you put in a lot of effort into your personal statement, and obviously you will think you've done an excellent job, and you almost certainly have, everyone who reads it and everyone who interprets your CaRMS application will have a different taste or their own perspective that they bring to whatever they read about you. So although you have done your best in preparing, other people are going to interpret it however they will, and that's not really under your control. So all in that, you want to try to make your letter reflect your unique personality and your unique experiences and what brought you to essentially apply for this job in residency. So try your best to make it reflect yourself, so that that's what people learn about you. And last thing to remember is that everything you talk about in your letter is fair game in your interview. So just make sure you're careful about what you say. Everything you say has to be truthful and can be, discussed in your interview, and typically it is, depending on the type of program you apply to. They often will draw on something that you've written about in your interview to help kind of personalize that experience. So just make sure that you are happy to discuss everything that's in there. And that's it for this short video on writing your perfect personal statement for CaRMS. And if you like the video, just remember to click like and subscribe, and feel free to send a message if you have any other ideas for videos or any questions. Bye for now.